Welcome to the In Defense of the Fence podcast, everybody. The podcast where on the fencers go to see both sides just a little bit clearer. I'm your co-host, Writer.
And I'm your co-host, Thinker. And you're probably asking yourself, what is this about? What do we mean by in defense of the fence? Well, this podcast is for the undecided voter. That is to say, the voter who is on the fence about where they're going to vote in November, who wants an unobstructed, fact-based view of this political landscape. What that means is that we are going to be presenting you guys with fact-based information. We're going to be giving you guys reputable sources to look up and learn from. And we're not going to be leaning into the media narrative, and we are not going to be leaning into any misinformation or disinformation that is out there. Now, another question you guys might be asking is, who are these two schmucks? What expertise do they have to talk about politics? Well, I'm a former Navy sailor. I got my undergrad in history, and I am a current political activist.
And I am an award-winning playwright, musician, screenwriter, and creator of the YouTube brand Writer Reacts. And so we have a lot of interest in politics. We've been studying politics and economics our entire lives, and never, ever have they been more prescient than now. So what better way to voice our opinion and talk about the facts and nothing but the facts than with the debut of our very first podcast, the In Defense of the Fence podcast. We have a lot to talk about. Thinker, you want to get into it?
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
All right, let's go. Topic number one, and the only topic we will be discussing today, is the 2024 vice presidential debate between Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. We had a live stream on the YouTube channel about this. Thinker and I both watched it with bated breath to see how it was going to go. Thinker, your
and
thoughts?
Clench fists from time to time.
White knuckle fists.
Oh my goodness. Oh, it was something. It was a stark contrast from the presidential debate. I think that's the first thing that people are going to notice is this was so much more cordial.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't have thought it given the amount of information coming out beforehand about how Vance was going to be going after Walz on his military record, and he was going to be calling him Traitor Tim.
No.
None of that happened.
Yeah. If I had a drinking game where I drank every time somebody said the words "I agree," I would be like face down in the toilet by the halftime. I mean, you saw just how pleasant it was. It was respectful. It brought you either to a time of old politics, or it showed you how new politics are going to be going forward. And the funny thing is that we always knew that vice presidential debates don't really move the needle that much, but then you can even see it in the television viewership numbers, where like the vice presidential debate only got like 43 million views as opposed to the presidential, who had 67 million views. And you got to wonder if that 24 million difference were the swing voters.
There's a good portion of the undecided voter who is undecided purely because they don't care about politics. And it's hard to make an argument that those voters would care enough about the vice presidential debate to care to watch it. But at the same time, there's a lot of undecided voters that are undecided because they just don't know what the truth is anymore. They want to care, but
I know
they don't know what to believe anymore. And I think that for those voters specifically, this debate actually helped in some ways because it was so cordial and there wasn't so much crazy statements getting thrown out.
I'm going to challenge you on that, because like we all see, I mean, everybody, or at least the people who are deep in the trenches and elbow deep, we've seen exactly the kinds of things that JD Vance is willing to say. And none of that was talked about here. So like, if you wanted like any more like chances to show just how untrustworthy he might be at this point, because like it's not like Tim Walz has all these skeletons in his closet or has to backtrack from the things that he said. I mean, JD Vance said multiple times that he wanted a very specific type of family look. And not only did he not say that, but he wasn't forced to say it because Tim Walz didn't bring any of that up. you know, and somebody like, "Oh, JD Vance looks very different." Oh, that's because he's not saying half the things that he's said in the past.
True. Let me allow me to rephrase that
No.
for the undecided. I think that for the undecided voter who is undecided because they have no idea what the real policies are,
Yeah.
I think that this debate was a lot heavier on talking about the policies. Now, whether or not they talked truthfully or accurately about those policies, that's what we're here for. That's what we're going to discuss. But the point is, there wasn't talk of Haitian migrants eating cats and dogs that derailed everything else in the debate. Like the
Mhm.
policies were what were discussed. Now, the facts of those policies are up for debate. And we're going to get into that a little bit once we get into the questions that were asked.
Do you think that's what people want in this day and age? They want the catchy, like, memeable moments that will go
I think,
viral. I mean, like, because, like, yes, naturally, you got 2 aging guys who are up on there, they're given policy, and that's the one that people actively tune out from. You got eating the dogs, eating the cats, and we were a part of history because our live stream catches us in that moment, reacting to that specific moment in
yeah.
history. Take that, McGraw-Hill, put us in the history books. But, like, do you like but do you think, like, that's what people are looking for? Like, we're so in it for, like, Trump has turned politics into reality TV. There've never been this many eyes on
Mm.
politics, like, especially
Yes.
from, like, the younger generations, you know? So, like, is this what people are looking for? Yet, when you have people like Tim Walz expanding on Kamala's policies, there were fewer eyes because it's not as, you know flashing lights and full of stimuli.
Yeah. I think it's a mixed bag, honestly. I think there's for those that want to know what the policies are and they're just
Mhm.
tired of
Yeah.
hearing different versions of a policy.
Mhm.
Yes, that's what they
Mhm.
want to hear. They don't care about the flashy, like, one paragraph clips that you can just clip and put into a TikTok video. They
Yeah.
want to know what the policy is. They're tired of the memes. That
Yeah.
demographic is tired of the memes. They don't want memes anymore. They want facts. They want to know what they're voting for, you
Yeah.
know? I do believe that there's a certain, like, group that again probably doesn't care enough about politics to care in general. They're probably getting those like those clipped pieces from debates in their social media feeds, and that's
Mm.
purely what's dictating their vote, which
Mhm.
is a little scary.
Yeah.
uh,
That's probably
because
the 24,000,000
if we
that
know
we're
one thing
missing.
about because if we know one thing about the last decade of voting is that what is clippable is not always accurate, you
Oh, and
know?
it's well,
And
and no, it's
therefore, if that's
yeah.
what you're basing what your vote is going to be on, you're not basing your vote on facts. You're basing your vote off of quotability.
Well, then in that moment, like, what do you think the major electorate is focused mainly on the policies, or do you think they're focused on, like, the feelings? Because the first debate had feelings. This one didn't have so many feelings if you weren't really in tune with how many lies were actually told. And you know what? One of the first, like, lies that really were kind of pervaded the entire debate was, what does the VP actually do? And I feel like we kind of like nip that on the bud first and foremost,
Yes.
because many times throughout the entire debate did JD Vance say the Kamala Harris administration. Trump has even used it as his closing statement in the first debate. Why didn't she do it for the past 4 years? And you actually know exactly what the VP does.
The VP position has only ever in history been responsible for three things. That is it,
Hmm.
just three.
Hmm.
They are responsible for being someone who is aware of the current administration's policies and views so that if the current president, passes away or whatever, they have somebody who knows what the deal is ready to take over and so that things are smoother. That's the first job of the vice president. The second
Hmm.
is being They call them the president of the Senate. The the vice president's job, second job, is if there is a tied vote in the Senate, their job is to break that tie. They have the final vote in the event of a tie. That's the second thing. The third job of the vice president, which we got a pretty big dose of in 2020, um, on January 6th, is to ratify the presidential vote, which was a big reason we had the J6 riot, was because Pence refused to follow Trump's demands to not ratify the 2020 election. Those
Yeah.
three things, that is all the vice president has ever been responsible for in history. And um, it's it has always been that way. And this is the first year I can ever remember. And I'd be interested to see the numbers of other vice presidential debates and see how many people tuned into those versus tuned into this one. This is the first time I can ever remember the vice presidential position being so important in
Mhm.
in the election, in the debate, in the election story,
Yeah.
because in the past, everybody always, oh, vice president doesn't do anything. And now
Mm.
Trump has tried very hard to tie Harris to Biden. In fact, I'd say he's gone a step further than that with certain voters and made it look like everything that's happened under Biden was Harris's fault.
Which is the exact reason why we have this podcast in the first place, because like critical thinkers know that you can't just plaster somebody's name on top of like an administration and just assume that it's that. I mean, like, but
Mhm.
Trump's strategy has always been if you say something loud enough and long enough, people will always follow suit
And
and believe it.
catchy enough.
Yeah,
Like
but like
he's
tampon
about
Tim, like
making
how
things
is that
catchy.
catchy? I don't understand. But anyway, this is probably one of the most popular ones just because one, more people, these days have access to these debates, like they never had. Like even when Palin was running for VP, people didn't have access to streaming and just TVs like they do now.
Yeah.
People were probably tuning into Kane and Pence, but only because
Yeah.
it was Trump. But now you have like, Governor Walz, who's got that, kind of like down home Midwestern, favorability. And then you got JD Vance, who was propped up for so long as not only being in the pocket of the right wing technocrats, but just being labeled as weird. And then everything, like you said, everything is a meme. So it just like hypes these people up. It's like I'm watching WWE and it's like we finally get to
Yes.
see them fight after hyping up all of their backstories. And then here you go. What I would be interested to see is the minute to minute um, coverage and viewership to see if the viewership
Mm.
started at one number and then slightly, fell to another. If they realize that
I
this is not going to be exactly what the media hyped it up to be.
I heard an interesting take, and I have no idea whether this is true or not. This is just somebody's thought process. Is
Yeah.
that a bunch of people probably turned off their TVs after the first question was asked, and
Oh yeah.
that was because like this is already a stressful election season, and you start off the debate with a question about foreign policy, and not just any foreign policy, an extremely heavy and kind of scary bit of foreign policy.
And not only that, like if you want to add insult to injury, if you're a Democrat, Tim Walz did nobody any favors by that stuttering first answer. But again, like if you look at like the CBS moderators, and we'll get to talking about them, like you and I
Yeah.
commented, like the question was framed that there were so many crises that the American population was dealing with, whether it was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, whether it was the job strikes, or whether it was Hurricane Helene. Governor Walz, would you support a preemptive strike on Iran from Israel? And I'm like, what the fuck did that have to do with any of that?
Yeah. I don't have any real answer there.
Hmm.
I can't pretend to understand what CBS's thought process was on that, aside from the fact
Yeah.
that it was maybe the fact that it was brand new news and it had just happened.
Mhm.
That being a news organization, they felt they needed to get that out there because
Yeah.
it was so huge, but sometimes just because a story is big news does not
Mhm.
mean that it is debatable news.
Yeah.
This was a fresh thing. This happened, I think, the day before the debate.
If you're in the situation room, you don't have that many days to, like, make a decision and to talk about it, and so, like, maybe this is a way to prep, but it was so off-putting. It was like saying going to a friend, you're going out to dinner, and you're asking your friend, "Hey, are you lactose intolerant? Because this dish has kale. This has kale, so I just wanna make sure you're not lactose intolerant." I'm like, "What the fuck does that have to do with anything?" So, sorry. Anyway,
um,
go ahead.
I don't think the undecided voters care that much about foreign
No,
policy.
no, they
So
don't. It's at the bottom
I,
of the
I am a
ticket.
little confused as to why that was the first question asked, and it really just kind of set a weird tone for the rest of the debate, I think.
Yeah. Now, did Vance answer that question too? Because he was asked the same thing.
He did a non-answer in a very slick way, which I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day reads better to the undecided voter. He started out his answer by talking about himself. Um, and there could be any number of reasons why he did that. My personal thought on that is that he wanted to eat up some of that time with a non-answer to the question so that he didn't actually have to end up answering the question in the end, because he didn't end up answering it. I think he ended up blaming he blamed Harris.
Well, this is basic
He
strategy. Like what I've noticed is that I believe he was always going to do that in the beginning. He was always going to do that because he knows, and he even said it. Like, like Governor Walls and I are pretty much unknowns to, like, the undecided voters, and this was like the first time that those two were going to get on primetime television for such a large audience all at once. You're not going to get that at a rally. You're not going to get that at any other, like, even like 60 Minutes. You're not going to get that kind of audience. This was the time to do it, and he knew he was going to do it during any, or at if whether the question was this or immigration or the economy, he was going to do it now. A strategy for debaters I've always noticed that they do is they say, I want to answer the question, and then they answer with something that doesn't relate to the question that was actually asked. And then, but
yeah.
as it's but basic psychology, after somebody says I want to answer the question, anything that they say after that's mildly similar to the topic can be
Yeah.
considered, like, you think that, okay, they just answered the question. When you think about, like, what they actually said, no, he didn't say anything about supporting a preemptive strike on Iran at
Yeah.
all. He didn't say
And
anything related to that. Neither did Walls.
neither did Walls, but to Walls' credit, he did at least make an attempt to tie the subject to Trump, in that he answered by one of the things he mentioned was the Iran nuclear deal, which
Yeah.
Trump pulled out of. And at the very least tried to make a connection there as to the fact that Iran not being boxed in by that deal had a lot to do with where they are now in their ability to go after Israel. So I think, despite his fumbling, kind of jumpy answer, I do think that at the very least he made an attempt to tie the subject to Trump, whereas Vance really just talked about himself and then blamed Harris in a very vague way.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Vance blaming Harris again goes, like, directly, to what we talked about with the VP and everything, and all the relationship or the job responsibilities that she has. Now, we
Mhm.
had talked prior about whether or not they were going to attack each other or go almost side swipe each other and go straight for the top of the ticket. Which one do you think they actually went for?
Well, before the debate, you would have been forgiven for thinking that they were going to go at each other's throats, or at least
Yeah.
Vance was going to go after Walls. But
Hmm.
again, that was all because of the media narrative. But that's not what happened.
Hmm.
They mainly attacked each other's top of the ticket. Walls went after Trump and Vance went after Harris. And there was a lot of cordial conversation between the two of them. They didn't really go after
Hmm.
each other at all. I think maybe there was a little bit during the abortion topic about Minnesota's abortion laws, and something that Vance said in regards to that. But I don't believe this was not a visceral.
Mhm.
knockdown, drag out fight. This was
No,
a
no,
cordial
God,
debate
no.
where both sides attacked each other's top of the ticket.
But respectfully, almost,
Respectfully,
but,
very
like, even
respectfully, very
but, like
cordially, very demure.
yeah, even with all of the respectability, it's a lot easier to overlook all of the blatant, like, misinformation that happened through
When
some.
you have a cordial debate like this, it's really easy to get sucked into how smooth and slick and confident JD Vance sounds when he's on a debate stage. And it's like,
Mhm,
man, he's saying this so confidently. He's not stuttering on anything he's saying. He's so confident. His confidence must be born from truth. This must be
mhm.
the truth.
Yeah.
But and I'm not saying that the Democratic side doesn't have the same problem. It's just as easy to fall into misinformation when you're, hearing from a guy like Walls who is very down to earth and like very normal and relatable. Being
Yes, but, like,
relatable doesn't
yeah,
necessarily mean truthful. So I think people
yeah.
need to be careful in looking at a cordial debate as being a truthful debate.
Don't listen for the volume, listen for what is actually being said. Not how it's being said, but what is being said. And I think,
Yeah.
yes, you can be down the middle if you want, but it is so wrong to conflate these two as equal because one side had a lot more rhetoric and lies to them. And we'll get into that in a second. But let me just ask you before we get into any more of these individual questions, what were your overall thoughts of the debate itself? Like, how do you think they did? Who do you think won? What were your overall thoughts? I know you had to leave a little bit early, but
I
you caught up.
honestly, I've been thinking about this for the past few days,
Mhm,
and I still can't come up with anything better than I think it was a tie. I think it was a draw,
mm,
and to that end, I think it was a win for Walls.
mhm,
And because I think that a draw for Walls is a win because he was the less polished debater. He was the one who needed most of the prep. He was the one that everybody was talking about was nervous before. Everybody knew that Vance's media correspondence experience was going to give him an edge. Everybody knew that Vance's debate presence was great. Like everybody knew that. So for Walls to bring this to a draw, I think was a victory for Walls because everybody expected Walls to get beat, and he didn't. He held Vance off, which says more about Walls' ability to stand on a debate stage against a polished debater and hold his ground than it does about Vance. So
yeah. No, I agree. How did you think Tim Walz did standing up to Vance, or how do you think Vance did standing up to Walz?
I think that it fluctuated throughout the debate. There were certain times where Walls really just did not do well, and we're going to talk about some of his worse answers that he had. Um, but I think in other areas, specifically on the abortion issue, on the democracy issue, and I think even a little bit on the economy issue, Walls had a lot of good points. And I think that he presented a lot of the information in a way that was factually believable to somebody listening and that they could understand exactly what he was saying and how it related to them. And that's
Mm,
not to say that Vance didn't do something similar, but his was a little bit more misdirection than actual laying out of facts and policies.
mhm,
But I think he did a good job in certain subjects. I will note that the subjects that he did really well on against Vance were the subjects that the Republican Party was already not doing great on. The abortion issue, they're not going to win on that issue. That's
mhm,
been their Achilles heel this entire election cycle. The one thing that he did well on that I was not expecting him to do well on, and by well I mean that him and Vance kind of fought to a draw on it, was the economy. I did expect Vance to kind of steamroll him on the economy because Harris and Walls have not been doing a good job at explaining their economic policy this entire campaign. I think that this debate was the first time that Harris's economic policy was explained in a way that was digestible and understandable.
Economic
And
policy, like what parts of it?
I wish that he had fought Vance on the tariffs issue a little bit more, because that's a big bit of misinformation that's going around right now, is that tariffs are good for the American people. They are
I don't
not.
I don't know if
And I
I
don't
mean,
think, even if Vance didn't bring it up, I still think it was worth Walls bringing up the fact that Trump's tariffs plan does not work for Americans.
I think he brought it up a little bit, but I mean, at this point, like, how much do you really want to go into it? Because people know. I mean, at this point, the catchy elevator pitch to tariffs is that tariffs are a tax on imports, and
Mm,
all you need to know is that like that will affect the consumer. And I think enough people are speaking on about that, but I think people are looking to see exactly like how much money is going to go into their pocket. I mean, okay, you can tax China all you want, or say you're taxing China, but people don't really know how that affects them until you talk about dollars in their pockets. And I think Walls
yeah.
did a good job there. Um, tariffs, I mean, tariffs are such a macroeconomics talking point that I don't know if undecided voters really care about tariffs too much.
Here's the thing: the economy is the top issue with the American voters right now. The top
Mhm.
issue.
Yeah.
So if I'm a Democratic leaning undecided voter,
Yeah.
I want Walls to beat Vance on
Mhm.
this subject,
Mhm.
on the subject of the economy. I don't
Yeah.
think that that happened. I think that they were, much like the overall debate, I think the economy issue was sort of fought to a draw, which
Okay.
again is a small victory in Walls's favor, but I
Mhm.
don't think that it's not, it's less of a victory than the overall debate being a draw, only
Mhm.
because it's the top issue. And if you fight to a draw, then that undecided voter still doesn't get the answer they want. One of the things that I'm interested to get your take on, think or writer, is what who do you think, what did you think of their arguments respectively on climate change, especially as it relates to Hurricane Helene?
Well, let me break it down into two parts because the first part is strategically just about basic debating and winning over that sympathy vote. And I think that's what both people were trying to go for. Vance, especially. Vance was laying on the polling for sympathy way more than Walls was because Vance brought up his kids first. A lot of it was just very prepared because people had been plastering Vance as just fake and artificial and weird. And this was a chance for him to look a little bit more normal, but it still seemed very planned. And so when he was asked about Hurricane Helene, first of all, every time he was asked about some sort of disaster that was happening in America, whether it was the hurricane, whether it was school shootings, he would start them off with the sympathetic note by saying, first of
Mhm.
all, our thoughts and prayers go out to the people affected by Hurricane Helene. And then very strategically, he would turn over and include Governor Walls in that and say, and I'm sure Governor Walls will join me here on this stage tonight to say that our thoughts
Yeah.
and prayers go out to people because that, if you say it first, if you talk about it first, then when the second person does it, it has less meaning. You've stolen their thunder, and everybody will always remember you as the person to have said that first. And what he didn't do afterwards is talk about how the very project that is supported by JD Vance, which is Project 2025, which is Trump, the project that Trump also supports, because you have people on the Heritage Foundation admitting that Trump is completely supportive of it. Project
Mhm.
2025, there was a very clear section in it that calls for the dismemberment of Noah, which is the very program that is used to combat things like this, to observe hurricanes and natural disasters. And so I couldn't help watch it in such a contradictory fashion and watch it because it was so blatant. What was happening is that he was pulling the sympathy card without ever mentioning Project 2025. And I'm disappointed that Tim Walz, with such an easy layup, didn't capitalize on it. And the third thing, it's hard to watch this thinking that this is the person that is going to be pushing climate change when we know the actual agenda, like he said afterwards when he talked about housing, is imposing on federal lands. And as we all know, federal lands includes things like the National Park Service. They include things like the continental shelf, like off the Pacific coast. It's so hard to not hear the contradictory status of somebody saying we are pro clean energy and have the top of the ticket's main motto be drill baby drill. We are drilling
Yeah.
for natural gas. We are drilling for oil. We are imposing on federal lands. Again, the National Park Service. So here is the map of the national park, or of the just every piece of land on the US that is owned by the federal government. So you see National Park Service, which is in the olive green. Everything red is in a Native American reservation. All of that is protected by the federal government would be imposed on and able to be drilled on or dug up for housing if
Mm.
JD Vance got his way. So it's very hard to see how this party is for clean energy while at the same time drilling and mining all of this protected land.
And building on allegedly or what they plan to do.
Right, exactly. I mean, you look at it, like, it covers almost all of Nevada, Colorado,
Yep.
Alaska, essentially, and, like, all of that is protected. Wildlife reserves, national parks, endangered animals,
Yeah.
species, Native American reservations, all of that
Yeah.
would be a would all of that would be able to be dug up,
Like,
and
where does this end? Like, where does this federal allotment of federal land for housing, where does it end? Does it
yeah,
end
I
at
don't know.
national parks? Or,
Mhm.
like, are we gonna start taking land away from reservations?
Which is just another missed opportunity for Walls to have been on offense, and,
Yes.
I wish it was discussed, but he talked a little bit about it, but he didn't go on the offense like I expected him to, but
No.
whatever. That was my main takeaway when it came to who
Yeah.
won. I agree with you. I believe it was a draw, which I think works out for the Democrats because it doesn't push them back any further. What I will say is that Walls was light on almost every offensive point. Walls is just naturally a nice guy. So he was light. I have here January 6th. He didn't mention the plan to pardon insurrectionists. Hurricane Helene didn't mention Project 2025's plan to eliminate NOAA. Springfield didn't acknowledge that Vance denied aid to them in creating housing to the community once immigrants moved in, because let's not forget, Springfield is in Ohio. Who is a senator
Yeah.
from Ohio? JD Vance. This drop
Vance.
was brought to him. The only thing that Vance talked about when it comes to climate change, and this is the second part, is he said the best way to combat climate change is to domesticate a lot of clean energy companies, bringing them back from China to America, let alone a lot of clean energy companies are still in the US. But
Yeah.
bringing them back to America, his argument was that because America is a very clean economy, and by doing so would incentivize clean energy. That's not necessarily true, and I was trying to follow his logic, and I really couldn't. I really couldn't figure out how
It
where the companies were coming from and the parts were being manufactured, how that would ultimately affect the product of reducing carbon emissions.
look, on an international scale, the UN has put into place certain measures that countries have to meet
And then
about,
carbon
you know,
caps.
yes,
Yeah.
they put in carbon caps. So saying that by sending work over to other countries that are somehow less clean in their production, that carbon cap exists everywhere. So you're saying that, like, oh well, there it's dirtier production over there. So like obviously if we send more jobs over there, it's gonna pollute more. That, first of all, that's a super roundabout way to
Mhm.
claim that somehow manufacturing is the only thing leading to climate change, which we know is not true. There are plenty of other factors that lead to climate change besides
Mhm.
manufacturing. I present Exhibit A, cow farts, which was a big
Yeah,
thing back in the
yeah,
day.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah, and people started freaking out because they're like, "Oh, because of this war on methane, they're gonna start banning cows." I was like, "How do you ban an animal? Like,
That was
how does
yeah, that was
how
an
does that
argument
work?"
from that was a believe a 2020 campaign issue. But
Yeah.
anyway, this idea that somehow America is more clean and therefore we should bring jobs back to America and that's going to fix the climate is really a little absurd. And but
But like,
I want to mention your point about the things Walls didn't say. I believe that him hitting those points is the difference between this debate being a draw and this debate being an affirmative win for the Harris Walls campaign. He mentioned Project 2025 in regards to reproductive
right.
rights.
Which,
That
if
was
you're
the
going to
only
mention
time
it, that
that
would
was
be
the
the moment to
only time
mention
he
it.
mentioned Project 2025. What people need to know is that they are against NOAA, which is, for those of you who don't know, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association. This is the weather. These are meteorologists. These are people that give you up to date information on hurricanes, on tornadoes, on wildfires. These are the things that American people who live in these high impact zones need to know in order to make informed decisions about what they're going to do in crisis situations. And Project 2025 wants to get rid of that service.
Well, the main reason why Project 2025 says they want to get rid of NOAA is because they say that it's providing a lot of false propaganda about climate change. Yet, when JD Vance is asked about climate change on a national debate stage, he had openly admits that it's real and says the best way to combat it is to bring more jobs domesticated. And so, I have a few points about that. One, it's not like jobs aren't being created every year. Jobs are being created every single year, hundreds of thousands of jobs, mind you, every quarter, really. Second of
Yeah.
all, the change in the main traditional Republican standpoint on climate change isn't so much climate change denying, but talking about how expensive the manufacturing of clean energy has become. That seems to be their more talking point. The extreme far right is more hell bent on denying climate change at this point. All right,
Okay.
let's go to those final two questions. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protest in the spring of 1989, but Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy? To which his response was, um, pass.
Yeah, I wish it was
Essentially,
that.
essentially,
All he had to do was I goofed. I was messing around with buddies of mine.
which he did near the end.
I made a goof, but here's what I learned when I was in China. That's all he had to do. But then
Mhm,
he created the problem that at the end of the question, the moderator came back to him and said, the question was this, and you didn't
mhm.
answer it. Oh.
I was there sometime in the summer, and that's all I said. And while I was there, I learned a lot about governance from the Chinese government, from Mao Zedong. Like you learned a
I
lot
think
about
maybe not
governance.
from the Chinese government, but you had so much time to prep. I don't understand how you didn't prepare a better answer for that question, considering that that was a major point. If they were going to go after you and attack you, they probably that was one of the areas they might have gone after. So I don't understand why there was no prep for that
Do
question
you
specifically.
do you really think I don't? Because you and I keep in the political light a lot. I don't. Do you really? Did you hear a lot about this? Because I this is the first time I ever heard.
I was very surprised that Tenement Square was the question that got asked
Well, right,
because
because like these are the main things. I didn't hear about the Tiananmen Square thing, and I don't give a shit about what he did in the '80s. Whether he was there, whether he was the fucking guy in front of the tank, I don't care. What I care about is what I care about is his response to Black Lives Matter in Minnesota, and whether or not he mislabeled himself in terms of his military status. Like
yeah,
other than that,
and
and he wasn't like to clarify, he wasn't wrong in the military status. He just didn't retire under that status, but he kept the
yeah,
title. If the two major things that Tim Walz is known for, or at least the right is trying to pin on him, which is his response to Black Lives Matter and his military status, it you got to say that at a certain point, not bringing it up is almost JD Vance's fault.
yeah,
You
because if we're
know,
going to attack, if we're gonna criticize Walls for not attacking Vance on some points that he could have attacked him on,
Mhm.
we have to criticize Vance for not doing the same thing. And I wonder, like, part of me wonders whether or not that was part of the strategy,
Well,
whether his campaign staff were like, listen, dude, you're not well liked amongst the undecided base. Walls has you well beat in the likability rating.
mhm.
Like, people like him a
Well,
lot more than you. So
no.
maybe stay away from the attacks because the attacks make you more unlikable. That might
I
be the thought process there. I'm not saying that that was. I'm just trying to understand why he wouldn't make those
I
attacks.
I honestly think that the strategy on the Vance, debate team was to focus every single second on Kamala Harris and just sideswipe Tim Walz. Don't spend time insulting him.
Okay.
Let the moderators do it
But
and just
that's the
go
thing.
straight for Kamala.
He didn't even sideswipe him on those subjects either.
I mean, like, go around him.
Okay.
Just be like, everything is the Harris administration. Like anybody
Okay.
believes that the vice president has any
Yeah.
of that power. But okay,
For
if we're going to
sure. For
talk about
sure.
Tiananmen Square, if we're going to talk about Tim Walz's worst question, let's go and talk about arguably JD Vance's worst question. Oh God, this is a long question. Okay. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud. The governors of every state in the nation, Republicans and Democrats, certified the 2020 election results and sent a legal slate of electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said that you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? And J.D. Vance said,
You would know more than I did. I actually had to leave that part of the debate.
that is true. You did have to leave that.
I got to work and I ended up listening the next day and I heard about that. I was like, God damn it. I missed the best part.
and and here's where we have to pull the mask of objective reporting a little bit off because there's no possible way to compare the two worst answers and say that they're both equal. Because Walls flubbed up an answer on his experience in Tiananmen Square over 40 years ago. What JD Vance's answer to this was, it wasn't even an answer to this question. It was an answer to what Governor Walls turned to him point blank and asked, did Donald Trump lose the 2020 election? And JD Vance said, Tim, I'm looking towards the future. I'm looking towards the future, and that's what I'm focused on right now. And then Tim Walz looked right back down the barrel of the camera and said, that is a damning non-answer. And it
No,
is.
actually, Vance
He blamed Kamala Harris for being in the pocket of technocrats, which is ironically where Vance is with Peter Thiel. But he
is
blamed
right
Kamala
now.
Harris. Right, exactly. And he blamed Kamala Harris for censorship. He also said that because of all of this, and this is where he brought it up, he didn't talk about anything related to 2020. What he talked about was Hillary Clinton saying that Donald Trump didn't win the 2016 election because Russia had bought $500,000 worth of Facebook ads and said that because of that, Trump wasn't a legitimate president. First of all, Hillary Clinton didn't have to do the peaceful transfer of any power. Secondly,
Mhm.
Trump is still contesting the results of the 2020 election. And
Yeah.
third, exactly what Tim Walz said is that January 6th was not Facebook ads. It is
Hmm.
irrefutable how different those two things are. It is a widely known fact that Russia did influence the election, whether there was collusion or
Yeah.
not. That's been dispelled. But Russia
Yeah.
influenced the election. They're doing it again this time. So is Iran. So is China. The best way to influence the election is to get all of the American electorate to turn against each other. And that's what happens. Look at, we're like 50-50 in this election. Who the
50-50.
I don't understand how we are, but it has been proven Russia and China create bots on social media sites like Facebook, TikTok, specifically designed for Americans to turn against each other. They will say
And
they will troll the left, they will troll the right to get us to fight all the
yeah,
time.
foreign adversaries of ours understand that that's the only way they can beat us. they are relying on America's failure coming from within and coming
Mm,
from the division within the country.
mhm.
And so, yes, they are spending a lot of time trying to influence this election, you know? Vance did a very good job most of the debate of giving slick answers that if you're not paying attention, you could misconstrue as fact.
Mm.
This was the only one that he answered where it was a clear, you don't have an answer for this question.
This wasn't the worst answer because we already knew
Mhm.
his position. What the worst answer was, well, first of all, if we go back to healthcare, I mean, there was a bad answer back there where he said that Trump
Mhm.
saved Obamacare.
Yeah.
Like, do you
Yeah.
remember that one? And he said he saved Obamacare when Trump was
Oh
the
yeah. Yeah.
has
Oh
when
yeah.
Trump
I remember
has
that.
very very clearly said that he has wanted Obamacare gone. That is a blatant lie. We
Yeah.
already know that. I would say the worst answer though was right after he didn't give an answer for this and said that Trump issued a peaceful transfer of power on January 20th. That is what
Yeah.
he followed this up with, was saying that Trump
Yeah. A
gave
peaceful transfer
Trump
of power.
yeah, and I
Um,
talked about this at the end of the live stream. I don't know who that lie is for. We can clearly see that
for the
Vance is
base.
doing this,
It's for Trump's
but
base.
this is the problem because, like, we know that the base is unmovable. The base will not move no matter what you say. And if you're doing this for an audience of one, which is Donald Trump, okay, you can do that. But the debate is for the undecided voters. And if the undecided voters have already decided that what you're saying is a lie and you're trying to win them over, I do not see
Yeah.
what the harm is
It's
in just saying that he lost because you know the MAGA people
well,
will never move. So if you can say that he lost the election, get some undecided voters over to your side and then be better off for it. But I don't understand what the logic is in continuing to push the lie.
part of me has to wonder whether or not this is the measuring stick of loyalty that Trump uses. I don't think he can stomach anybody working for him that doesn't believe that he won that. You
But like
know?
what's he gonna do? Like sack Vance at like the 11th hour? No. So like
No,
again,
but
so
it
like what's
would
the point?
probably would create tension within the party. I mean, there's already people saying that like Trump doesn't like how well Vance performed at the debate. They're
Okay,
saying
yeah,
like
but
they're
like
and again, this is all speculation again, but there are people that are saying that like, oh, he's going to want another debate now because the person his underling performs better than he did, and he can't have that.
all right,
So
but still, like that's semantics. That kind of news is not going to get down to the undecided voter. The undecided voter, if they're watching one night, which is the vice presidential debate, and they see somebody continue to push the lie that they already know is debunked, that's going to turn them off more than get them over to your side. So I again, like he can be mad at you, but if you end up helping him win the election, then all the more power to you. He can be
yeah,
mad, the MAGA base can be mad, but they're not going anywhere. Either way, it was a terrible, terrible answer. Either way you put it, and he followed it up with an even worse point, which was saying that Trump
yeah,
conceded and he delivered the peaceful transfer of power, which we absolutely know is not true.
it's not
Um,
true. Walls' worst answer, Vance's worst answer. Nobody gives a shit about Walls' worst answer.
well, that's the kicker. The kicker is the main difference is the worst answer that Walls gave was about an answer about himself. And the
Yeah,
worst answer that Vance gave was an answer about the top of the ticket accepting democracy.
yeah.
That's the main difference. The main difference
And
is,
at
do
the
you trust
yes,
the top of the ticket to accept the results of a very fair election and it uphold the democratic values? Do you uphold your democratic values as a voter, even if the president doesn't?
yeah.
Unfortunately, I think that's all the time that we have. November 5th is coming right up around the corner, everybody. Make sure you are registered to vote. If you're not if you're helping, if you have the time, volunteer to be a
Yes.
poll worker if you can, or go and canvas. That's what we've been doing.
Make sure that you're registered. If you've moved in the recent past, and if you've gotten married and your name has changed in the recent past,
Mhm.
make sure you're registered because there are very small things that can change that can make it so that you are no longer registered.
Yep. If you've recently deceased, let us know. We can help you out with that. All right. So For non-political content, guys, visit the rest of Writer Reacts. Check out our merch. Check out our Patreon. We got so much going on. It's going to be a busy month up now until Election Day. Check everything else out, and we'll be coming out with episodes every Friday. So stay tuned for that.
Thank you for tuning in, guys, and keep thinking critically.
Keep thinking critically. I feel like we shouldn't have to say it, but we do.
We do.
All right, guys. We'll see you later.
See you next week, guys.